All right, we are live. Welcome everyone in the room and online to this panel discussion on open publishing. The way it's going to work is we're going to do a little round of introductions, and then we've got some questions prepared. We would love to hear questions from both the people in the room and from the people online. If you have questions for our virtual audience, please use the chat and not the ask a question option. Just so that everyone can see it and we can all interact more easily. If you have a question in the room and you're brave enough, you can come up to the podium. That's the easiest way, because then the people online will also be able to hear you. If you prefer, you can put your hand up and you can tell us, and then we'll kind of summarize the question so that the people joining us virtually kind of understand the question. And so with that, let's get started with some introductions. I can go first. My name is Janine Bijsterbos. I'm the chair of the Open Science Special Interest Group this year. And I guess relevant to this is that I am a handling editor at Neuroimage and also an associate editor at Neuroimage Reports. And I only started that 6 months ago or something like that. And the main reason or one of my key roles is to handle a new type of manuscript that's called an open data replication report that they're pushing there. And so I'll hand over to you, Pradeep. Do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Pradeep Reddy Ramana. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh. I'm not a handling editor anywhere, but I have strong opinions for the whole process. So, yeah. You will know my opinions very soon.
Hey, I'm Sam Nastasi. Can you guys hear me okay? Do I need to talk into a mic? It's all right. I'm a postdoc and lecturer at Princeton, do some things with like open data, and probably open review would be the most relevant thing here.
Rosa, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Rosa, and I'm this year's Open Science Room Chair. I'm a PhD student with the hope of graduating this year at Vanderbilt University, where I currently pursue my degree. I'm very excited to be part of this panel and delve into one of the key issues of modern science, I think. And yeah, just learning the ropes here.
Simine?
Hi, everyone. I'm Simine. I'm a professor at the University of Melbourne, but I'm currently joining you from California. And I have been a journal editor at a handful of different journals in psychology, and editor-in-chief at 2 of them, and currently editor-in-chief of an open access journal published by the University of California Press called Collaborative Psychology, where we try to have relatively progressive policies on openness and transparency. And I'd love to talk about open review in particular, also registered reports, open data, all of that stuff.
Thank you. And Tanya, running us off.
Yeah, Tanya White. I'm a professor of pediatric population neuroimaging at Erasmus University in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. But next month, I'll be joining the intramural NIH at the NIMH. I've been a deputy editor for the journal American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and also currently am editor-in-chief of Aperture Neuro, which is the new OHBN open access publishing platform for OHBN.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Very exciting. So let's dive in. Let's think a little bit about publication bias. And so one of the questions I wanted to ask, and I'm happy for anyone to jump in on this, is kind of broadly what types of publication bias exist, how do they influence what does and doesn't get published, and how does that sort of impact or drive the broader peer review system? So it's a pretty broad question, and feel free to jump in on any of it. I'll pick on someone. Simine, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I think this is a really big issue. And I think publication bias can mean a bunch of different things. It can mean bias that comes from journals and editors and reviewers, or it can mean bias from the authors. And those are really, really hard to separate, because often part of what motivates authors' decisions is what they think the reviewers and editors will like. So even if the bias is coming from the authors, it might ultimately be coming from the publishing system. So it's really hard to say, but I would describe it as any bias that pushes for statistically significant results or exciting results, or results that confirm a hypothesis or theory. I think that's a really, really big problem. I think a lot of journals justify only publishing on the basis of the interestingness of the results, or allowing that to be a relatively important factor, because they think that those are the only things that are going to be interesting to their readers, or maybe they're more honest and they admit that a big part of the reason is that they want their impact factor to stay high. And there's a lot of kind of myths and ideas around what would happen if we published without regard to the results. So if we made publication decisions based on the importance of the question, the strength of the design, et cetera. And we now know a little bit more about what happens when you do that because of the registered reports option that many journals are offering, which allows authors to submit their paper before the data are collected and analyzed, so nobody knows what the results will be. And journals offer an in-principle acceptance if they like the idea of the study and the justification, the methods, et cetera. So now there's some research in psychology showing what the difference is between registered reports and regular papers. And indeed, the publication bias evidence is quite strong. So in psychology, about 95% of traditional papers report statistically significant results, whereas in the registered reports literature, it's more like 45%. Of course, they could be asking different questions, but it's some preliminary evidence that publication bias is a big problem, and that we need to think about at least introducing some avenues for results to get out there, even if they're not significant or exciting or whatever. The evidence also suggests that readers tend to find the registered reports just as interesting, creative, et cetera, as traditional papers, and more rigorous on the method side. This is preliminary evidence, but suggests that maybe there's not necessarily a hit for journals in terms of reader interest and potentially impact if they are open to such avenues for publishing.
Thank you.
And
Anyone else want to? Yes,
I'll just,
please, Tanya.
yeah, I'll jump in and make it a little personal. So if I look at my papers and then I exclude the reviews and other things and say, okay, what percentage of my papers are negative findings? And it's about 10%. But I would venture to say that 10% is higher than many, but it's still probably not high enough. It probably means that a number of my papers probably have publication bias in them, especially early on. So there is a pressure that comes when you publish. And now as an editor, so I really like the registered reports option. I like what we're doing now is pre-registering analysis plans. If we're not doing registered reports, those things can be extraordinarily helpful to reduce it. Yeah. So now I lost my train of thought. I'll blame it on COVID. It'll come back.
Thank you. We have time. We have plenty of time. Pradeep, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things, in my opinion, is reviewer bubbles. One of the things I had to learn through the end of my PhD was that I couldn't publish in some places because best practices haven't propagated into the mindsets and knowledge of the reviewers, and breaking the reviewer and editor bubbles is the best way to actually propagate them. So a lot of the biases, I guess it's a bias towards status quo, so to say. Like there is like a big wall to break, to change the practices. I think we made great progress with changing towards like open access and open data and stuff, but there is a lot of other walls in terms of methodological best practices that need to be broken into reviewer bubbles that are not being broken into.
Thank you.
I have more of a question. This is not my expertise, so this is a question, but to what extent do we think that things like, preprints and post-preprint like review? I mean, I think a lot of us currently write preprints with this idea that it is sort of like a preparation for like the actual submission, or we're gonna submit it to an actual journal. But if we could change the culture to kind of just, focusing on preprints and post-preprint kind of review, then maybe you would not have such the same kind of pressure, but maybe you would. I mean, like the way that Samin sort of framed it in terms of like, I think there's still pressure on the author's side to make your preprint in a particular way, right? But maybe it at least is not coming from the review process or the editors or something like that.
For sure.
So what's the question?
I'm curious whether preprints and like if we were to move toward a model of sort of preprints and commenting on preprints as a form of review rather than the sort of traditional journal based, whether that could provide a kind of complementary, help in mitigating this problem.
Just a quick plug. Wednesday, I think at 2:45, we're doing a NeuroLibre preprint talk here, so
Nice.
that might answer some of the questions. But go ahead, Pradeep.
There was a plug in the audience for a NeuroLibre emergent session
Yeah.
in the Open Science Room right here on
Wednesday, 2:45, I think, is when it's going to start.
Wednesday, 2:45. Awesome. Yeah. So anyone, again, if you wanna make it easy for the audience at home to hear, feel free to come up to the lectern.
Did I
So-
hear Samir's voice?
You did.
Yes.
So the other thing I did want to say, I can comment about the preprint. My thoughts on that question is that if journals then seek after those findings that are more positive, then I don't think it really helps in terms of which manuscripts are published.
Right.
And one of the things that I see from the review side, but also as an author, is the question of inference testing, how you go about multiple testing correction, because there's all different sorts of approaches for that. And some of them are more conservative, some of them are less conservative. I see papers, they have, let's say 50 tests, but then they divide it into 10, they do multiple testing in groups of 10. So you do 5 sets of multiple testing and sometimes it's challenging if you combine structural and DTI, which could potentially be 2 papers, and you combine them into one, then maybe it is okay to do that, but other times not. So those are some of the questions. So I think it's really important to present your effect estimates, the effect sizes when you're presenting results, and yeah.
Yeah, back to Sam's question. I think you're asking whether open peer review would help mitigate some biases, right?
Yeah, whether sort of trying to shift our focus as consumers of science to the preprints, and the sort of constellation of comments or open reviews that you might have surrounding a preprint from like that sort of curated journal version of a paper, maybe that would help to some extent. But I take Tanya's point, which is that if the journals then just sort of go through and pick the, most confirmatory, like the papers that have a particular quality to them, then it doesn't really solve the problem on its own, at least.
And
There is also a relevant question in the chat. Vale is asking, given all the biases mentioned and the large number of papers uploaded as preprints, do you think pre-publication peer review is a sustainable, scalable effort? And follow-up question, could the editors or journals become that of collectors, curators of post-publication open reviews?
Well, my answer would be we should all try publish less. Much less. That's the only sustainable solution.
that's interesting. That gets into a career incentives discussion for sure.
Can I
Which we can
jump in on?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think Sam's and Vale, I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name right. I think those questions are really important and are probably going to come up almost no matter which angle of open science and publishing we talk about, because I do think that separating publication from evaluation and curation is really important and necessary, and it won't fix the problems, but it'll at a minimum make it possible to study these kinds of questions of like, do we get more opportunity for negative results to rise to the top of the attention economy and so on if we do the publish first. There's less filter on what gets published. I also think it just doesn't make sense to publish only after evaluation. It makes a lot of sense to me to let things be published and then put the evaluation and curation on top of that. And I do think there's a role for something like editors in this world where I think first we need to vet a little bit what gets even onto preprint servers, right? So there's some curation happening there so that things are in the right domain and so on. And there's also some role for vetting reviews, right? We don't want offensive reviews or reviews that are totally inappropriate. And I think an important role for editors or someone who organizes peer review to make sure that anyone who wants some feedback gets some feedback, which I think that's the biggest danger of this, like publish first and let a free for all, happen in terms of who reviews and so on. But honestly, I think that on this and many issues where people raise concerns with this new model, that the same concerns apply in the old model. We just have no way of tracking them. So for example, in the old model, the idea is that at least the editor will read your paper and give you feedback. But the reality is that many editors just reject a large number of papers, which is reasonable, want to save reviewers' time, but don't provide feedback. So there's no guarantee that even that person carefully read your paper or that they'll get any feedback. So I do think a world where we kind of take the best of our current peer review system and put it on top of a published first model preprint server, I think we can really improve things, or at least track things that we couldn't track before and find out where the problems are and try to improve them.
Totally, that's a really good point. On the topic of reviews, there's a huge variety of sort of the quality of review and the helpfulness of review. I mean, in an ideal situation, a peer review is a helpful system for a paper to go through to improve the quality and add additional ideas or checks into the paper. But some reviews can be only a couple of lines, and some reviews can be really, really detailed and doing the work of a sort of type editor. And so, does anyone have any thoughts about how we can kind of homogenize the quality of reviews? Maybe more training, maybe there's even a way of getting data on that across the means kind of lines already, because there are systems that have a large number of reviews in them.
I mean, I think open review is one good way to do that, right? Because it can give people who are just like you're a grad student, you get your first request to review something, right? You really don't know. I mean, you don't have examples in front of you for the most part, right? Because they don't exist, or they live on a a publisher's like server or something like that. So I think it can be, then you can get a breadth of examples. Like you can look at various people who are providing open reviews and what those look like. And,
I think it's really tough.
I'll let Pradeep go first.
Yeah. To the specific question of how can we improve the quality of peer review, I think we can have a checklist in terms of the expected set of items we expect them to do, such as actually like if the editor invited a reviewer for a specific reason, for example, they knew at least one technique or one of the fields of this interdisciplinary paper, we actually say that, hey, Mr. Smith, review this method section part, also comment on how it affects the overall pictures. So maybe set of 4 to 10 items, depending on what they're expected to invite, have the checklist, and maybe the checklist would actually form up two or three paragraphs. So that would eliminate these lazy, oh, it looks good, this is my friend, this is my aunt's friend,
Right.
So yeah, the checklist is one way to go about it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. Samin, did you want to add?
Sure, yeah. I think this is a really tough question because I think there's a lot of different ways a review can be good, just like there's a lot of different ways a manuscript can be good. And it would be really useful to know on what dimensions, reviews were valuable and so on. So you could have a review that's valuable because of the technical scrutiny or because they check the reproducibility of the analysis and results or things like that. So I think, I think there's this idea that if reviewers disagree, that's a sign that reviews are low quality, but I don't think that's accurate. You might explicitly recruit reviewers because they have non-overlapping perspectives or expertise, so on. So I think it's a really, really tough question. But once again, I agree that open review is going to help us study these things, right? And I do think it provides some motivation to reviewers. And by open, I just mean transparent. So the content of the review is public, not necessarily the identity of the reviewer. I think that's a separate question. I think I have mixed feelings about that, but the publishing the content of the reviews to me seems to have no real downsides and a lot of upsides, like being able to track this and also providing some motivation for reviewers to do a good job. Because even if their name's not published, they know that the review itself will be out there. It'll reflect on the article if the article is accepted, but clearly didn't get vetted thoroughly. It'll reflect on the journal and could potentially reflect on them if people, well, at least the people who know who they are.
And I wonder if we could even do something like have the authors grade the reviews, like how helpful was this, so that we can actually get some information on what makes a review helpful. And I also personally think there's a little bit of space for more training of, like you mentioned, the graduate student who doesn't have an example. That graduate student should have a PI whose role it is to train this person, not just in research skills, but in broader kind of community skills. Pradeep, you wanted to mention something?
Yeah, so the other aspect of improving the quality of the papers is improving the quality of the papers itself before they go to the reviewers. So oftentimes what I do for machine learning papers is to send out a what you call a template that I have for mistakes people make doing cross validation, many other things, because it's so frequent. Like going that also is the result of the reviewer bubbles I mentioned before, that haven't really updated their knowledge about how to do it right, etc. Right. So before even papers go to the reviewers, we can try to make sure that the paper meets minimum standards in terms of many methodological details and other issues, even English language, so to say. So reviewer can just focus on just like the higher level idea, whether the conclusions are supported by the methods and data, etc. So that's one of my pet peeves, because sometimes I feel like authors are using us as to proofread their papers, and that like basically kills the motivation. That's when my reviews go from 800 words to, I don't know, 50 words or 10 words, so just wanted to mention.
Yeah, thanks. And so it reminds me, your comment about reviewer pools and editor pools, it reminds me of the comment that was made at the start of OHBM, that human brain mapping, I think it is going to have an open call for editors.
Oh, did they?
Which, yeah. And so I'm curious whether you think that will be helpful, both from a perspective of diversity, but also from this perspective of pools.
Yeah, thing is, it depends on who is approving them.
Mhm.
Like from what I understand, by no means I'm an expert on this. I wanted to become an editor a couple of years ago, but I decided not to pursue, because anyway, the way I understand it is most people become editors after they themselves pursue the position and know people in some way and then get approved, right? So so in a way it's open. You just had to reach out, but we need to correct for the biases by the editors and the journals itself. Anyway.
Mhm. Mhm. I think we have a couple of questions online.
One of which is mine. It is mine, maybe not directly relevant. We can circle back to that. Please continue.
Okay. So, it seems like we've all got, there's a lot of ideas in the community and a lot of ideas on the stage here. And so I wonder, like, if you could, where are you putting your eggs in terms of the future of peer review or of the publishing system as a whole? If you want to pitch something briefly, what would you go for?
I don't know about eggs, but one thing that Smee said that I think is I think resonates really well, right, is like, I'm not sure that we want to, there's this tension, right, and we want to have like a sort of, certain standard things must be met, in terms of like quality, right, but we don't probably really want like homogenization of anything, I would say, right? I think like what you mentioned of what HBM is trying to do, that's a cool kind of new idea. The more we're doing that kind of stuff, like experimenting on the kind of edges of this space of the way that the system could work, or in terms of how people review, like Samin's point of like different reviewers, like if you're the type of reviewer that is going to like actually download the container and rerun the analyses, like that's awesome. That's a cool contribution, and most reviewers are not going to do that, right? And so I think like creating the space and encouraging that kind of just like, system level experimentation of like how things could work is like a super important thing, right?
That's great, and I feel like eLife, as one of the journals, has done a lot of that, and I personally have enjoyed their kind of. So they have a system. I think they still have it, where reviewers are not have a post review each individually and then have like a post review discussion
like a consensus
where
kind
they're
of-
all kind of brought together and have some consensus. And I've personally enjoyed that both as a reviewer and as an author.
Mhm.
I thought that was really productive.
It was originally pioneered by Frontiers, just
Ah.
to give credit where it is due.
Thank
They
you.
call it the interactive peer review model,
Thank you.
and that's the whole. So I really love that approach.
Yeah.
So unfortunate they became a business first and a journal next, but
Thank you. So maybe with that, we'll go over to Tanya, who's here as the Aperture editor-in-chief. So it's a relatively new journal, and I'm curious, in the light of the experimentation that Sam mentioned, what are you picking up from things that have been done before, and what sort of new things are you doing that you think are exciting?
So some of the things that we're picking up and are trying that are different, but actually are present in other, so they're not completely new, but is that we're calling them research objects, so they can be also non-traditional types of submissions. So they can be code. There was the plug by Smear of NeuroLibra. So one of the thoughts are to submit tutorials or interactive type documents, which through notebooks like Jupyter Notebooks or Markdown or things like that. So those are being done. Regarding the review process, we've had lots of discussions on the best way to go in that route, and so one of the questions about because the thought was to be completely open. The reviewers' names are present. They're there, but we decided, and this came from people on the editorial board who were more junior. They said that if you have junior people, looking at papers of people who and critical of people in the field, they were concerned that they didn't want their names listed. They wanted to be able to review, and they were just concerned about ramifications and that. So we allow that decisions up to the authors, whether they want their name published as a reviewer or not, whether it's open or not in that regard. We also, I think it was mentioned, some of the future, I think two things are really critical for the neuroimaging. One is, we've mentioned the registered reports. Moving more and more in the direction of registered reports, I think would be very beneficial, and also embedding replication. And I think neuroimaging, when it can, should move in the direction of genetics and embedding replication into the studies. So the other thing is the educational objects. So that has been, so OHBM has absolutely wonderful on-demand media, and the ComCom committee has done fabulous work in structuring these into blogs, but also the on-demand, you can watch them. So then the question is, how can we have tutorials or educational documents that are publishable, but also, if presenters are presenting material that's already published, then there's questions of copyright and that. So we're dealing with some of those questions, but we very much like to move to have media-based educational documents derived from perhaps some of the educational sessions of OHBM.
Thank you.
I can say something about what aperture means to me. That I guess Tanya heard enough from me about this, but I am hugely, hugely inspired by aperture because it's a community project in my understanding, and I hope it'll continue to be a society-oriented journal that is open to amendment based on the input from community members. unlike other journals, we're not going to name them, that are run by Elsevier and Springer, etc. So that's what aperture means to me. I'm somewhat uh, like, I think that's the future. I think you were asking the question before, that the future is community accountable, society oriented journals who are open to changes as needed based on input, that are not just focused on the efficiency and profits and whatnot. And I don't know, one important root cause of all this is basically publishing too much. Again, I guess I want to point out this routinely. So you have to find ways to reduce the amount of garbage we put into the peer review process to improve the quality of process and outputs too. So
Thanks. And maybe the research objects that Tonya mentions leads nicely into your question, Rosa. Do you want to ask it yourself?
Sure. Yeah. I was just thinking, as a PhD student, we struggle day to day. Like, one of the things that we cannot publish less, and we have to graduate. And to do that, we have to publish, and it's a very brief time. And your PI needs to review, but they don't review everything. So, like, I was just like wondering what the best way is. And research is not a, one single project. You have tried a lot of things along the way, and you forget at the end of the process, basically, what you initially tried, what was your thinking process. So I was thinking, like, how wouldn't this be like super helpful if we had almost like a journal diary of that research, just brief notes of what I was thinking, why I did this research, why I did this experiment, and then what was the outcome briefly. And then after that paper is written and published, that would be also like an accompanying, almost like a supplementary material that goes along with it. Like, what do you think it is? Would it not be helpful in terms of like finding personal biases that we insert into our research? And then also it's a great way to kind of like track negative results, because even if it doesn't go into publishing, it will still be there, that we tested, it didn't work, here is the thing that didn't go into publication. And I was wondering, or is it just like adding to the researcher's plate? It is another thing that the researcher needs to do, and it is not feasible. What do you people think about that?
can I?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I say publish less, I don't mean don't even try to publish. So just to be clarifying, so the problem, just publish when they're ready. Do what you need to do. Go through all the checklists of best practices that you could have followed in your time and publish, right? The second issue you're talking about is there's a lot of null results. I think that's what you're referring to, right? So the diary process, I think there is a project called Lab Scribbles. I think basically it's a live sharing of how they do experiments and what they do. There is similar things to happening in the community also. That itself is a useful output, but is not a what you call a valid scientific advance in a specific subfield, so to say. So it may not be publishable as an original article, but I think the underlying question you're trying to ask is we need more ways to publish null results, right? So the answer to both of these, in my opinion, is basically being able to do good work and just reporting what you did without any concern of whether it's attractive or whether it's actually like without the subjective evaluation of its potential impact or significance, so to say. So that's the answer. Just do good work, publish. In this process, you probably improve the work and results. End of story.
I'm kind of curious because in my mind, that might lead to publishing more rather than less.
No.
Because because I feel like there's currently some bias that work that gets done doesn't get published. And so if everyone does the work and then publishes it.
So when I say follow the best practices, I mean follow the best practices in the broadest sense of the word that applies to interdisciplinary research that we work in. From what I understand, if you were to implement all the best practices, let's say in machine learning, neuroimaging, quality control, as well as statistical control at the end of the results and publish, a good experiment based on a good data set can easily take years, which is not being done today by most people, except a few people who are trying to advance the best practices, so to say. I have no doubt in my mind, if people really make an effort to learn the best practices and update their knowledge in each of these subfields and then follow them, the quantity of papers will go down substantially. What happens now is they don't think much, download data, run something, report. That's why we have like a large number of papers.
I think, but I think the reason that we have a large number of papers is because we have this like scarcity of positions and this kind of like crazy competitive, like, way too many people gunning for the same faculty positions kind of thing, right? So when you're in that kind of environment and papers are the currency, then people are just going to publish as many papers as they can. Obviously, like quality can be the currency. And I love what Rosa was saying about like, that's a very cool kind of like experimentation idea. Like, why not just have I, as a scientist, just have a website where I just put all of my sort of stuff that I'm doing in a kind of chronological way and how my ideas are evolving and how we did this analysis, then we did this analysis. It's all reproducible and none of it ever goes into a paper. That would be cool. That's a cool like experiment that somebody could try, but you can't, the system that we live in does not accommodate experiments like that, because ultimately you're gunning for a PhD position where the hiring committee, you're gunning for a tenure track position where the hiring committee only cares if you've published X many papers or a paper in X journal, right? So,
Yeah.
So I can't help but yap. So there are some alternatives. I've heard a bunch of stuff already in terms of like, should we have more papers, less papers? So what about ideas like data publishing, right? I mean, we're talking open publishing. That's one segment of it. You'll hear on Wednesday about NeuroLibre, which is the preprint, like reproducible publishing, and some of those checklists that you're talking about can be applied there. So I think, maybe there's ways to do it so you have different levels of publishing, because a preprint could be really good for some first, year grad student who just wants to get their data out there, or what you were describing in terms of, showing all these very valuable results and so forth. So I agree with Pradeep. Like, I don't think that we should print more garbage, but there's so much value. Like, scientists are not getting credit for data publishing, right? So imagine and the reason they're not getting credit, first of all, is because there's no way to do it. So imagine you're able to like have mechanisms, which we are deeply working on, to be able to, share your data in an effective way, get credit for it, cite a DOI, cite a preprint server with all your notebook and analysis efforts. And then, these could be things that, and by the way, just a quick plug for the NeuroLibre talk. There's going to be some, like curation involved and reviews involved in that as well, so that, you can have like a first pass of what you might want to eventually publish if it turns out to be the cure for cancer or whatever the next greatest paper. And one last thing, as part of INCF, for example, we are doing all kinds of like best practices of data sharing. And we have a mechanism where you can, we do preprints on F1000, and it's open to the whole community, so you can get information about what you're doing. And that's all sort of like, pre-published, if you will. So these are all things that we could add to it, and I can feel Pradeep is going to argue vehemently with me, so go for it.
No, I think you misunderstand what I said. I guess, yeah. When I say publish less, I don't mean don't try to publish, right? So if you have good data that's gone through all the best practices in terms of making it fair, quality controlled, etc., publish. By all means, publish more of that. But my point is that's not being done because they're trying to get everything out the door as soon as possible. I published a lot of software papers myself too, so I'm a supporter of publishing everything good, but make it good, reusable, and high quality before you try to publish.
I'd like
right.
to.
My shit
I'd like
disturbing
to.
is done. My shit disturbing is done.
Samin, go on. You want to jump in?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, so my comment is more building on the 3 or 4 last ones, not specifically this last one, but I think that, all of this talk about what we ought to do, what people ought to do, I think a really, really hard question is how are we going to get there? And I think Sam's point about people are going to keep counting publications in prestigious journals as long as that's what they're being evaluated on. So to me, this my kind of unpopular, where we need to focus some of our attention at least, is really making the prestige journals that drive incentives earn that reputation. So if they're going to control, if we're going to say this is the most valuable thing as a publication in X journal, then we need to hold them accountable and ask them, okay, show us your review process. We have to expect transparent review from the journals that we're saying like their judgment matters them. We're going to hire people who can get past those people. Okay, then what does it take to get past those people? Why are we taking it on their word that they're picking the cream of the crop of the top 2 or 3% of papers? Let's see the review process at a minimum, right? Let's see more information from. So there's a lot of talk of openness and transparency on the part of researchers, but we demand very, very little from journals, even journals that we hand over control almost of our hiring and award and grant practices to, that we say their judgment is so good that we're going to outsource our judgment to them. Okay, well then let's see. And I suspect that there's going to be a lot of resistance to transparent review from those prestige journals, partly because I think there would be a lot of it would be revealed that their review process is probably not that different from many other journals. They're probably not investing more, getting better reviews, getting more thorough reviews, etc. And I suspect actually that in some ways we know they can't possibly be getting more thorough reviews if they're not requiring authors to submit data and code with their manuscripts, for example. The journals that are requiring authors to submit that, at least there's the potential that reviewers are checking that stuff, right? So I think to realign our incentives, part of the problem is we need to start demanding more of the journals that we're giving so much power over our incentives. But I think that's not a very popular thing, right? It's a lot easier to talk about best practices and what we, on the journals on the margin that are not very prestigious, we can do the best thing, right? But we're not going to supplant the current incentive structure if we don't demand that the journals whose opinion matters so much in our hiring processes also show us, their process and make sure that we hold them accountable to the best standards, the highest standards of publishing peer review practices.
I have a
So what do
better
you
solution.
recommend?
Sorry, yeah.
I recommend, a lot of grassroots, pressure on those journals. So I don't think that people can actually not submit to those journals anymore. I just don't think that's realistic, right? But we can ask, why aren't you doing transparent review? Why aren't you requiring at a minimum for authors to submit a replication package or whatever, they're called different things in different fields, but on submission, even if it can't be made public, at least the reviewers should be able to check that. Maybe we should, hire, if the journals make a huge profit, hire people to check the reproducibility of every paper, right? And there's stuff you can do on a tiered system. So only papers that make it through the peer review process and are contingently accepted for publication go out for reproducibility checks, or so you could even pay someone to do an actual replication from scratch of the very most important work. That would be showing value for the money of these extremely wealthy publishers, right? And we could be asking for those things. And it is hard to know what leverage do we have. We can ask for them, but we are the reviewers, we are the authors, we are the members of societies that often are affiliated and give lend their name to those journals. So we have some leverage. And I think even if it's unrealistic to say we're just going to withhold our submissions, we could try to shift how much we contribute to those journals, either as authors or reviewers, at least bit by bit, and be loud about what would make us more willing to trust those journals.
I think we have a lot of. Sorry.
Let's do Tanya first, and then Pradeep. A lot of people excited.
Yeah, I actually think we have a lot of leverage if we could work together. So before I moved to the Erasmus University, I was at the University of Minnesota, and when I went there, I went to a writers group, which is a group of people with masters of fine arts. They wrote fiction, poetry, short stories, things like that. So they asked me about how publishing worked. And they said, let me get this right. You submit a paper that you wrote. They don't pay you. You sometimes have to pay to have it published. The people who review the paper don't get paid. They do it for free. And they were trying to understand this system of how it works. And so we are the motor that drives this whole scientific system. So one of the nice thing, and thanks for Pradeep for your plug for Aperture Neuro, is that it is community driven. We are nonprofit, but there's other journals like this where the goal is really to support the community. And so we have a voice. We have a really strong voice. We just don't maybe work together enough.
Yeah. Are we allowed to swear? Okay. So I'm going to respond to both Simin and Tanya. So, Simin, the problem is academics. Okay. That's the source of all the issues you describe. People who are actually have this fascination and addiction to submitting these, what you call so-called prestigious glossy journals, so to say, right? So if academics don't submit, academics don't review for them, they won't exist. They exist because academics have this fascination, infatuation about these journals. In my personal opinion, which people may disagree, I think the solution is to reject the concept of prestige altogether and focus on good QA and quality processes, and that's it, right? So
I can add something there too. I mean, I don't, it's not, I mean, I think it is, we can say like, yes, we are the ones that must sort of like change in order for this, but I don't think it's that straightforward, right? I think it is really important to figure out where the sort of like points of contact are, right? And so one important point of contact is your institution's library that pays millions of dollars to these, publishers, right, in subscriptions. Okay, so that's one place where you might have leverage. If you could sort of change the culture in your institution about the kinds of things that they subscribe to, that's like a particular point. Obviously, the authors are sort of like laboring for free and also just directly paying APCs at these journals, right? So you can try to apply pressure there. The reviewers are working for free, right? And they're not, I mean, so they can withhold their, reviews as well. And then the editors, right? So it's the editors are getting paid some kind of, not very much, right? Or just working for free to begin with. But the point is that, these are profitable companies. So the only way that you can really change their behavior is by withholding your labor and in a way that is collective enough that like it actually makes a dent, right? Because if like Dan Goodman decides to not review or whatever, right? It doesn't matter because there's only one guy, right? And so they'll just find 100 other reviewers, right? But if somebody can, build a big enough kind of coalition of people who are willing to kind of act at that sort of like library level, at that authorship level, at that reviewing level, at that editor level, then these sort of companies might start to feel some pressure, right?
So I think the open access movement has kind of solved that problem already, because I think the amount of money going through libraries is probably reduced quite a bit.
It's coming from authors, right?
Yeah.
But coming from it, but again, coming from funding from
Yeah.
like, NIH or whatever, that's
Yeah.
sort of like,
Yeah,
buying
Nature
your
is,
APC, right?
yeah, Nature is able to charge $11,000 because there are people willing to pay for it. Okay, you know who they are. You know many of them in your circles. Hold them accountable. Call them out. Shame them.
Yeah, but again,
But I think we're all saying the same thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I think you're leading with the stick, whereas others are leading with the carrot. Kind of let's. I think a lot of those want the same thing, and so it's call them out or let's come together and do this together. But I think the end goal is and the kind of intention is the same goal.
And it
here,
needs
probably.
you need that change at the kind of like evaluation stage, right?
Yeah.
Like if there are, I think, particular points, like when a postdoc is trying to get a tenure track position, or when like an early faculty is trying to get, a grant or something like that, those people reviewing those sort of, papers or whatever need to kind of be convinced of what
Yeah.
Pradeep is saying.
Exactly.
No, so that's my point. Academics are the problem because they are the ones making all these decisions. All they need to do is to get together in a room, say we don't need prestige.
Yeah,
It's an imaginary thing, really. That's it.
I
So-
agree, but there's like a multi-billion-dollar parasitic industry that sits on top of that too, and they're
Yes.
certainly part of the problem, right?
Let's move over to the
That feeds into my question, which I'd love for you to speak on, the role of tenure and reappointment and hiring criteria themselves. So the codified things that we must do, because if publications are the currency of academia, what are we buying? With tenure is often like the end goal. So one of the key points then, or critical places, is like, hey, it doesn't matter if you're going to get credit for publishing an open data set if the tenure committee doesn't really care that you have a data set out there. They want the publication instead. So how do senior faculty, I will say I have a bias against any suggestion that says graduate students or postdocs need to work more or do more. It should be senior faculty who are petitioning their tenure and review packages, changing them on a very consistent basis to align with what we're valuing here, which is open data sets and those citations counting toward tenure packages, or publications in other journals besides the prestige. So speaking to that a little bit, incentive alignment, like how do we get tenure criteria to change? Because then we reward academics for the things that we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that this goes. I'm going to disagree with Pradeep for a second. Say I don't think that we can do away with prestige. I don't think we're not going to have any heuristics about like what counts more, and I don't think hiring and promotion committees are ever going to read every paper or even a subset of papers. To be honest, like I think we're going to need heuristics, and we're going to need something like prestige, some kind of ranking, and so on. And I actually, yeah, I think like changing individual policies, like saying codifying that open data should count or open access publication should count, preprinting. That's good, but ultimately, I'm not sure. I've been kind of converted recently by arguments that that's just more bureaucratization, and that the faculty should be able to use their own judgment about for this field data isn't relevant, or for this field, whatever. And so I think what's more important is that we rethink prestige so that it tracks what we want it to track. So we can still rely on the committee's judgment of prestige is the wrong word, but is this a signal that they were doing high quality work? If we can't evaluate it all ourselves, what signals are we going to use? So journal name might be one, but then journal name should track the journals that actually implement the values that we care about and that we want to reward. And so it doesn't have to be the most selective journals, the most prestigious journals, in the traditional sense of the highest impact factor journals. We could be saying, are they publishing in journals that select on the criteria that we care about? Are they publishing in journals that check the data and the code that have a really high standard for how carefully calibrated the conclusions have to be, no hyper exaggeration, or whatever it is that we value that we want to reward? Are they publishing in ways that signal that they've passed those high standards on those dimensions? So I don't think it's doing away with metrics or rankings or prestige. Unfortunately, I mean, I would love to live in a world where we don't need those. I don't think that's very realistic, but I think we can really pressure on why are people using the metrics and indicators of prestige that they are, and do those really align with their values?
We know they don't, right?
Yeah, so have that conversation, have that debate out in the open. If your colleague says, oh, but this person has 3 nature publications, ask them, what's so great about a Nature publication? What do you know about Nature's process that makes you trust what they vet over what this other, this person published in this journal, and here's why I trust that journal. They require open data, they do reproducibility checks, they publish the content of the peer reviews so we can see how thoroughly they were vetted. So to me, getting through that process is a better signal that this researcher does good research according to our values than publishing in Nature, right? That argument, we can start having those conversations once we have concrete things we can point to. What does Nature do? Well, this journal does these other things. Does Nature do that, right?
But those profitable journals are always going to be incentivized to do like the least amount of work, right? In some sense, right? So I think I totally agree with all of that. I just think it's going to be like a hard sell, but that is the kind of question I think that you should be asking, pushing faculty to kind of.
So you probably know we have these debates on Twitter almost every week, so it is very, very, very well established fact that these for-profit journals are not going to change their practices.
I take your frustration, and I think they're not doing enough, but I do think they're listening, and I think they're behind, and I think they're slow.
Okay, let me give a simple example. Go to NeuroImage. I'm sorry to call them out directly, but go to NeuroImage website, find a paper, click on the download PDF button, and tell me what happens. It takes you to something called reader.elsevier.com, which is basically tracking your movements and watching your actions and selling the data to someone else.
Well, that brings us in an entirely different discussion.
Just one more sentence. Well, the reason I mentioned that is I send them angry emails, repeatedly reminded them, when you said download PDF, let me download the PDF. Why don't you do it? But they don't do it because they have an incentive to track.
But I think the question,
habits.
But I think
the question is not how do we get. Sorry.
No, I wanted to reiterate your point. I mean, they're not going to listen to one person, but I think they are seeing the pressure and the field shifting, and I think they are surely too slow. And I'm not trying to make excuses for them, I'm trying to be optimistic that if we come together and we have a voice of a community, then I think slowly but surely there will be some listening happening.
And the question isn't whether we can bring any specific journals around, right? The question is how can we make sure the journals that we give so much power to are the ones that deserve it, if we're going to have journals at all, but I think we will for the near future.
Which is why I named neuroimage in particular.
Yeah. So I think like if someone wants to claim a gatekeeper role or a journal takes on that role, then we have to ask why are we giving them that power, right? And we can have that debate, and journals should be able to move up and down in our estimation of are they living up to the gatekeeper role that we outsource to journals.
Yeah, but they are like the main business model of journals is to restrict access to something that could be freely sort of distributed, right? Like that's in some ways how they make money, right? That's what your APC is paying for. That. So I don't see how, I mean, their incentive, I would say, at least in like modern history, has never been to like produce quality science, right? Their incentive is to make money. So I don't understand, like, I mean, I appreciate the optimism and like they will certainly do whatever it takes to like release the pressure valve for when people start to get pissed. They will make some reform, but they will their goal will never be to produce quality science first and foremost, right?
Yeah, then other journals might crop up that do, 100%. Right? So I mean, it might not be. I agree that for-profit publishers may never come around, or at least not to the same standards as journals that are mission-driven can afford to in this competition for prestige, right? They can't afford to in the financial sense, but in terms of like, prioritizing publishing good science, vetting good science, contributing good evaluations, and so on. I think some journals can give for-profit journals a run for their money, and if we start assigning kind of prestige and credit according to how well they do that, then maybe we could run out the for-profit journal. The ones that don't keep up with that, maybe they'll lose.
Let's hear from a comment in the room.
I think it's not quite fair to say that journals inherently are not going to care about science quality, because although they make, their goal is to make money, but it's the goal of any business to make money, right? And so some restaurants, some clothes manufacturers, their pitch is our stuff is better than other people's stuff, right? So they can make more money if they can prove that their science is better. And this goes back to Samin's point about we need to hold them accountable, and it needs to be that, you know, we want to subscribe to Neuroimage because Neuroimage is publishing the best papers, right? But that's up to us as scientists. And I think an important aspect of this conversation, it actually goes back to the question about tenure review, is what are the levers that we have access to? Because we can have very highbrow conversations about what we can do, but some of us are in positions to actually make choices. I mean, every time we submit a paper, we have a choice about what journal to submit it to, but some of us are on tenure and promotion committees, and we have a choice about and hiring committees. And a lot more of us are on hiring committees than are, you know, in a position to affect what, but if there's neuroimage editors in this room, you have power. I know I'm on the Cortex editorial board. We have power over, and I know everybody hates Elsevier, but yes, Sergio, that's fine. But Sergio, who's the editor-in-chief of Cortex, tells Elsevier what to do. And he has that power because he's the editor-in-chief of Cortex. So editors-in-chief of HBM, of Neuroimage, you have power, but the rest of us don't. We can't do anything, but we're on tenure committees. We can do stuff there. So I think it's important to think about what are the things we can do. And, you know, it's like, publishing in Elsevier. Except for Cortex, send your best papers to Cortex. But it's not.
Can I say something? So you are acting in your self-interest now, right? So
yeah,
right. So
yeah, absolutely.
So point being, academics are continuing to act in self-interest despite knowing clear consequences to the science.
And the consequence of what Cortex has done is registered reports, verification reports. Like those are things that Cortex pushed through. And I mean, I joined the editorial board like last week. I'm not, but the thing is, they have been improving the quality of the science, and that I mean, that's why I joined the editorial board, is because they care about the quality of the science they publish.
I totally agree. I mean, I think I think boycotting or walking away from the table is one option, and I don't think that's a bad option. That's definitely probably that's the strongest way to put pressure on. But there are other ways to put pressure on, right? Like if you are at an entire editorial board of a journal can come together and go to Elsevier and say, this needs to be changed, and
It
have
happened.
that conversation.
That happened, by the way. Journal of Machine Learning Research has
Sure.
done it in 2001. We should follow that example.
Yeah, and we should. I think we absolutely should. So I think there's two approaches, and the walking away from the table or staying in the system and trying to have those conversations and move things forward and improve the system. I think both are valuable.
Just to correct myself, I didn't say walk away. I said burn them down.
I don't understand. You sort of take for granted, right, that like market dynamics are the way that like scientific publication and evaluation should work, like your restaurant example. But restaurants don't actually have to work that way. Just in practice, oftentimes they do, right? But like I would argue, for example, that healthcare probably is not, at least in America, is not like well served by the market as a kind of way of deciding how things work, right? So
Yep.
I don't think we should just sort of like take as a baseline assumption that like journals should be sort of like competing for as much market share.
I agree with you. Elsevier is going to be doing that, and Wiley and Springer, they're doing that.
Of course.
And insofar as we're engaged with them, we can manipulate them through the market dynamics. But if we start our own society journals and, you know, non-for-profit journals, I think that's a great alternative to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
divest from the profitable journals, I would say. I mean, there's no, I don't.
I think that puts
See
a lot
why
of I think that puts a lot of unfair pressure on the junior people
Why?
because they're going to be going to the hiring committees.
Yes.
So that's why you have to talk to your friends in the community. Hey, how do we evaluate each other? Really?
No, but when I say divest, I'm not saying like start with junior people.
No.
Right? It's start with the senior most people. Try to change the culture as much as you can in that particular direction, right? We've already identified that it's the hiring committees that are the real kind of like sticking point in a lot of cases.
And the funding. The
And
granting.
funding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So we got to start wrapping up here, given that the keynote has started. So I'll leave it up to Steph to have the last word.
To follow such a contentious conversation.
I know.
So I might take it in a slightly more future-oriented direction, slightly less practical. So I'm sorry. Hopefully it can be wrapped up kind of quickly. But we talked about, so you just mentioned how powerless, you know, the average person is to influence which journals or which papers are, you know, thought of as more influential or part like having bigger impact. And we've all been talking about like the context of journals as deciding what should be considered as having a higher impact or starting new journals that solve issues of older journals. But I haven't heard as much of a conversation about how we can return power to the community as a whole outside of the context of these journals, which inevitably end up adding a few different gatekeepers, you know, the editor and maybe like 3 reviewers. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that perspective. And I think we've seen a lot of this during the pandemic, actually. We've seen a few papers that are released as preprints that then became very widely like embraced by the neuroimaging community just because they spread on social media networks, but completely independent of these established journals. I'd love to hear more about that.
So I think we should leave that for the next session, because we do actually have a table topic tomorrow in this room at lunchtime. Hopefully Tanya will be able to join us again. And so I'd love to invite everyone back to continue some of this discussion on open publishing. And thank you so much for a really engaged discussion. I really enjoyed that. Thank you to all the speakers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank